Looks like it. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the last Children and Young People Scrutiny Commission meeting of this municipal year. And especially to any young people who, I don't think we have any that have joined us as yet. Oh no, I think we might do actually. Especially to Thierry, sorry for naming you, but we're especially grateful for any of our Youth Parliament or Hackney Care Council young people who were able to join us today. So thank you. So just in terms of housekeeping, so this is a formal meeting of Hackney Council and all the usual constitutional requirements of council meetings apply. It should be noted that this meeting is being held as a hybrid meeting with members and officers physically both physically present here in the town hall or connecting virtually. Can I remind members and officers, whether you are present here in the town hall or present connecting virtually, that this meeting continues to be held in public and is being broadcast live via the internet. The rights of the press and public to record and film the meeting continue to apply, and media representatives may be in attendance or viewing the live stream. In terms of operability, those of you who have logged on remotely, could you please note the following? Unless you are speaking, please keep your microphone muted. If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand to get my attention, and please keep your camera on so that so I can see who may want to speak. Before we start the meeting, I would just like to note that this is, again, as I mentioned, the last meeting of the Commission for this municipal year, and that for a number of our long-standing members, this will be their last time with us, as they are not standing for re-election in May. On behalf of the Commission, I would like to thank both Councillor Casey Hanson and Councillor James Peters for their support of its work for a number of years, and in particular, Councillor Hanson's reference to the distinction, our need to know the distinction between percentage points. It's been, yes, especially. It does matter. It does matter. It does matter. So thank you very much for your support for the Commission and your role in the Commission over the past few years. Thank you so much. And on a similar note, one of our parent governor representatives, Shabnam Hassan, is stepping down from this role at the end of March. Again, many thanks to you, Shabnam, for all your support for the work of the Commission over the past few years. Okay, now starting the meeting. So apologies for absence. Do we have apologies for absence?
Councillor Anna Lynch and Jackie Burke.
Thank you very much. Any other apologies? No. Declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Sizer?
Mother of a special needs child.
Joe?
School governor at Thomas Appen School and parent of a special needs child.
Councillor Peters?
Governor of the Garden School. Thank
you very much. And then item 3, urgent items. So with no urgent items, therefore we'll be moving on to item 4, which is our first substantive item of the meeting, which is parental engagement and involvement. Parental engagement and involvement has been a common theme in much of the recent work of the Commission, be this in relation to school exclusion, supporting children with special educational needs in schools, and of course the attainment gap. An additional £300,000 was allocated to Hackney Education in 2021-22 to support local efforts to reduce school exclusions. Part of that additional funding has been used to set up a parental engagement and involvement programme to build schools' capacity to work more effectively with parents. There is a short briefing enclosed within the agenda pack, commencing at page 9. For this item, we have Deborah Robinson, who's the systems leader, and we also have Annie Gammon, the Director of Education. We have 30 minutes for this item, so can I ask officers to highlight key information from the report for 5 minutes, and then we can have questions for 20 to 25 minutes. And please, can we just ask to focus on setting out the strategic objectives for this piece of work and any key areas of work being followed. So handing over to you, Annie and Deborah.
Thanks very much, Councillor Conway. And if I just speak for a moment and then hand over to Deborah. I think we all know that parents and carers' input, engagement and sense of belonging to schools is absolutely crucial to their children doing well, and having every opportunity to get the best out of their education. We're really pleased to have Deborah in the role of systems leader for parental engagement. That doesn't mean that she's the person reaching out to the parents, but that she's going to empower and educate schools further in building on the work they already do to make sure that parents, particularly perhaps those who haven't been involved over time as much as they should have been, are involved, welcomed, and are able to work closely with the school to support their children. Deborah set out a range of ways in which she's addressing this and is going to speak to those. So over to you, Deborah.
Thank you. So I joined Hackney Education in September, as you know, and my background is 23 years in school as an English teacher and an assistant head teacher. And thus far, my role has been an interesting one. I started by gathering a huge bits of information with regards to what parental engagement looked like in Hackney, and in terms of the schools and how parents were able to communicate and reach out to the schools. And this entailed looking at schools' websites and speaking to lots of organisations who actually deal with parents on a daily basis, and also visiting a wide range of educational settings. And it was very clear, it became apparent that there was a willing from leaders to do something with regards to parental engagement. And this informed a paper that I put together, and it also entails quite a bit of research in terms of the current climate around parental engagement. A lot of the research talks and continues to reiterate the need for parents to be engaged, and as such their children will have better outcomes. But my role really is to support schools in focusing on the parents who are somewhat on the peripheral, somewhat whose voices are not heard for one reason or another. And these reasons can be wide-ranging, from their own educational background, from possibly blocked trust that some parents may face. What we do and must really crucially understand is that a lot of our parents in Hackney are also ex-students of Hackney schools, and they were parents of Hackney schools when Ilya was, the governing, overseeing the schools. And what we do understand is that a lot of these parents do not feel that school was a place that gave them a sense of belonging, or made them feel like they were part of the curriculum. They weren't taken along with the curriculum. So what we have are some parents who are somewhat disgruntled, and not just disgruntled by the educational system or institution, but other institutions. So a plethora of reasons for somewhat parents to not feel that they are engaged. And so my real focus is to ensure that schools have identified who those parents are, and ensure that that sense of disengagement that parents feel is tapped into, and that schools are aware, and not just aware of perceived barriers, but are aware of what those barriers are that stop, that hinder those parents from being involved. Upon my visits, I'm also trying to really look at language and ensure that we move away from this language of hard to reach parents. No parent wants to disengage from their child's education. Every parent wants to know what's going on, and parents don't deliberately remove themselves from their child's education. Modern parenting, as we know, has become that much stickier, for want of a better term, but schools are learning and continue to embrace the different ways in which they can reach out to parents. And I'll just talk you through a few things. So, like I said, I've put a research paper together, and that highlights a lot of the information out there in terms of lots of research that the EEF and other organisations have done. I've also developed a self-evaluation tool, which I will be trialling with a few schools. And this self-evaluation tool just allows schools to benchmark themselves in terms of where parental, in terms of where they are with parental engagement. There are schools who have a named person and some schools don't. And some schools I've also found have a parent engagement strategy, but that seems to be subsumed within their well-being strategy. So the two dovetail nicely, but it's really key from what leaders have said that, you know, to have some key objectives around parental engagement. Lots of schools are interested in setting up forums, and this is something that I've been working with a few schools on. Setting up forums for, again, identified groups of parents is something that quite a few schools have welcomed, and like I said, I'm working on that. And again, the guidance I will endeavour to trial with quite a few schools as well, because what that does is not tell the leaders what to do, but more strongly suggest. So, for example, one school that has a very successful parent forum for African Caribbean parents, they gave me a little bit of feedback in terms of especially the first meeting, and for leaders to understand and probably be aware that the first meeting will be probably a little bit uncomfortable, and so in terms of how schools prepare themselves for that is important, and ensuring that one of the earlier meetings is about listening to parents and listening to just really hear and understand as opposed to respond. I have met with HIP and the Hackney Independent group for parents of children with SEND and EHCPs, and that was a really insightful meeting. I held two meetings with two groups of parents, one in the evening, one in the day, one in the evening, and essentially the real focus was around communication and how schools can communicate in a more enhanced way. Again, there are some actions to come out of that. There is a real need for the parents and SENCOs to ensure that one hand knows what's happening with the other. But it was an insightful and collaborative meeting that I had. And then in terms of moving forward, I wish to look at how we do that. I am going to also deliver some training. I've got various training sessions coming up. The first being on Friday at the Head Teachers Conference in terms of working with parents. Then following week, I'll be delivering to some assistant heads and deputies with regards to working with our parents in Hackney. And I feel the Hackney context, again, is crucial. And I feel the legacy of Hackney education is crucial for our parents, for our teachers, for our staff to understand, because what we have to appreciate is that not all of our schools are representative of the communities in which they teach. And so I think there's a piece of learning, a piece of work to be done there in terms of just members of staff knowing where they stand in relation to the students they teach, and therefore having an understanding, a critical understanding of how to engage. And that's not to say that Hackney parents are a different species. It's about an understanding of the legacy and what some of these parents will bring with them coming into schools and how they will engage with schools. I'm also...
Sorry, Deborah, sorry to interject. I'm just conscious that we've got about 15 minutes for questions. So I don't know if you wanted just, are you happy to take some questions, if that's okay? Or do you want to just, was there anything that you really wanted to cover before we move on to questions?
No, just headlines, focusing on the reading project, looking at parent champions, post-16, transition, and yeah, that I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, we've been, as I said in the introduction, we've been talking a lot about parental engagement, and we've been really eagerly anticipating your role and the work that you're doing to engage parents. So it's really encouraging for us to hear what that looks like, or what the beginning of your work is looking like. Do we have any questions from the Commission on this item? So I've got Councillor Selman, Councillor Young, and Joe. So can we? Do you mind, Deborah, if we take questions in threes?
That's fine.
If you hope you might have a pen and paper, and I'll just ask members of the Commission to try to stick. Not try to. Can you please stick to one question? I'm not very good at doing it myself, but one question, please. Councillor Selman.
Thanks, Deborah. Really welcome this piece of work, and thanks very much for all the work that you started on this already. I was just wondering, I was really pleased to see in the report that you'd met with some of the community organisations, and I was just wondering, in my experience, they play a really crucial role in terms of parental advocacy and sort of engagement and communication in both directions. And I was just wondering, as well as sort of the initial meeting with them, where you saw them sort of sitting with the strategy of engagement, and linked to that, assuming that they do fit within that, if there's anything alongside that about ensuring that they have the capacity and the funding to be able to do some of that work, because sometimes we can sometimes fall into the trap of taking for granted that organisations that are doing good things will always be there, and they aren't always. So I'd just be interested to know more about that.
Thank you. And Councillor Young.
Sort of jumping to a completely different area, I guess. I was just thinking about the difference between the maintained and academy sectors, and the fact that my experience as a parent is that feeling comfortable about your relationship with the school is very much about a relationship that human beings develop with each other. And so those can be, sort of how do you develop those relationships? And that can be about the individuals involved, but it can also be structural and sometimes procedural. And I wondered how much you looked at the practical procedures that schools, I'm thinking particularly of secondary schools, can have in place to keep parents out, because it's annoying and uncomfortable to have parents around and involved in school. So I'm going to give you just an example. If it is difficult to contact the school, so if the school restricts the modes of communication, the times of communication, and who you can communicate with, and you never meet them in person, that doesn't help. So I just wondered about, do you have a kind of almost a grid of different systems that schools have, and how will you look at that?
Thank you for that. And lastly, Joe, please.
Thank you. And equally, I also share others on the Commission welcome of this piece of work. I wondered if you have any overview on what the themes that have been emerging from parents themselves in terms of what they feel are the most important factors to feed into this. Because I can see you've spoken to lots of different people in lots of different settings, both parents and schools, but it's not quite clear from the reports so far what those emerging themes are and how that's going to translate into strategy. And in particular, you cited the Parents as Partners conference, and that was really offered a lot of insight. Could you tell us a little bit about what the key findings from that were and how they're going to inform the work? And to what extent, I suppose, parents' views are going to be at the heart of this, and parents are going to be able to co-produce this piece of work alongside school leaders? Thank you.
Thank you. Handing over to you, Deborah.
I'll try my best to address those. Annie, do feel free if you want to jump in. With regards to advocacy, I've worked alongside. I've had a fair few number of meetings now with Young Hackney and a couple of representatives from Pembury. And prior to my start, they had a parent champions group. Officially, Hackney have 6 parent champions, and they have talked, or they talked for quite a while. I'd say 2019, 2020, 21, but nothing has really come off the ground with regards to what they want to do. And part of what they want to do is a little bit of advocacy. But I think we just need to be very clear on what parent champions and advocacy looks like, because some parents need advocacy to support with maybe exclusion meetings, and it's not always clear where parents can go to assist. One of the things I'd like to do is ensure that schools understand what is meant by advocacy, and look at how parents can get support in terms of someone advocating for them. But it's got to be a reciprocal relationship whereby schools are aware of this mode of communication and help support existing, and ensuring that advocates are allowed to advocate for parents. Because what I've done actually is send a very brief overview around to a few head teachers about what I think advocacy is, and just try to get some of their views. So it is something I am thinking about. I'm not sure that I'm in answering the question in its entirety, but it almost overlaps with some of the work that I have done with Young Hackney on parent champions, which needs to be a little bit more streamlined. So it's definitely on my cards. It's definitely something I am looking at, but I want there to be a reciprocal relationship. And I'd be surprised if schools don't embrace it, because I know that it's about working together. But at the same time, there are schools who actually don't always want another person in the room when they're having a meeting with a parent. So it is about finding that balance. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Annie. I know it's on our action plan, most definitely.
I think probably I'd just add that the community and voluntary sector are keen to have a closer working relationship with parents. I think, Councillor Selma, as you pointed out, sometimes they don't have huge capacity, but they can have sometimes just the right capacity for a particular parent. And so we are due to meet them again to talk about how we can take forward better connectivity between us and schools and them, because I think that role of being an advocate, particularly I think early on in any situation where there might be any difficulty, is so important, and the more capacity we have in that field, the better.
Thank you, Annie. In terms of the next question with regards to maintained schools and academies developing relationships and the pragmatics around that, of the schools that I've been in, and I've been to over 20 schools thus far, over 20 schools, primary and secondary collectively, and the flow of communication is it's not always hitting the right people. The communication that needs to be received by the right parents is not always the case. And so what I've been looking at is what schools have in place to track and monitor parents who have not engaged, and if so, what their communication looks like with those parents. And it's fair to say that there isn't always a tracking and monitoring, but again, the practicalities of having parents engaged and involved are two different things. Engagement is very much about how we equip the parents with tools to support their child's learning at home. Involvement is very much what you're inclined to see on the primary level, in terms of you might go in, you might support with cake sales or raffle tickets or fundraising. So involvement and engagement have to be differentiated. And I can't remember who asked that question. It is about having a much clearer stream of communication. And again, those parents who need to receive specific information is what I will be working with schools to try and ensure that that is a lot more streamlined. What schools tend to do is send out a lot of information, and it becomes overwhelming. And we know one of the key barriers is IT. So I'm not entirely sure I've addressed that. I hope I have, but do feel free to press me a bit on that if you need a little bit more clarity.
And Deborah, if I can come in, I think there is definitely a difference between primary and secondary. Primary, taking your child to the school gate just builds a relationship, although I know it's been more difficult over the last 2 years with COVID restrictions, whereas secondary, that range of teachers that are there, the child going to school on their own, makes that connection more difficult. And indeed, children are growing up and sometimes want to be more separate from their parents at that point. But I do think the point about, are we auditing, probably particularly around secondary schools, what are the structural routes into communication is a good one, and something we can do to learn from what works best. I do think probably head teachers would say, well, we need our teachers to be teaching and not always available for parents to communicate with, but there needs to be a balance there, so that communication can happen easily when it is definitely needed. And then there was the
Thank you. And then the last point, absolutely. So communication is pivotal, and a lot of the senior leaders I've spoken to do talk about having another look at their website, having a look at the content on their website, because some of the blurb only seems to speak to certain parents, and that brings me on to the last question about emerging themes. And so, having spoken to parents, having been involved with the latter part of organising the Parents as Partners Conference, speaking to organisations, some really key themes continue to pop up, and those are definitely transition, exclusions, and SEND. In terms of transition, I'm also working with not working, but as part of my role, as it was before, I was part of the Hackney Schools Group Board, and I still sit on the curriculum panel. And there's a lovely piece of work that we are focusing on with regards to transition. I held a meeting the other day which incorporated several community organisations who work directly with with parents, and the focus was transition. And there is something that I believe that we can do as Hackney Education to facilitate the transition that parents seem to feel in terms of how smooth or not it goes for their child. So there's something that they seem to want from Hackney Education in terms of whether it is centrally devising something so that that same message goes out to all schools, or whether it's schools themselves just being a lot more au fait about who's coming through their gates and how they are going to communicate with specific parents. Parents have spoke quite at length about exclusions and not always knowing where to go and who to turn to. So this is another theme that continues to come out. So in terms of when their child has been excluded, and again, I am on the steering group that looks at reducing exclusions, and in terms of the focus here, it's about ensuring that parents have clear information and clear guidelines. But what does that look like? Again, it's something most definitely I'm focused on. And then SEND is also something that continues to come up in conversations. Having met with a large group of parents previously, HIP, last 2 weeks, I feel confident about some kind of co-production coming out of that. It's not clear on what that looks like at the moment, but the key focus on communication with SENCOs is something that is required, and to get some voices in the room along with some SENCOs is where I feel we're going. And some SENCOs have reached out to me to say that they would be very much interested in doing so. So those are a few key themes that have continued to pop up.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to take another 3 questions, and then I think that's going to be it for this item. Can I ask everybody to try and be as brief as possible, as we're overrunning on this item? I'm going to go with Thierry first, please, and then Councillor Gordon, and then Salma, please.
Yeah, hi everybody, good evening. Sorry about my camera. I don't actually own a webcam and I can't seem to get one for a reasonable price. So when I find one, I will hopefully get one. But my question is, do you think SENCO should have more training with children's mental health services such as CAMS?
Okay, and then Councillor Gordon, please. Thank you, Thierry.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much, Deborah, for attending this evening and introducing this really interesting piece of work, and having such a sort of thoughtful, exploratory approach to our questions. I mean, my question really is sort of slightly longer term. How are you going to evaluate the outcomes of this piece of work? I mean, there's obviously, there's a number of different things that you're looking at. I mean, it seems to me from the questions that probably one of the major themes really is involving increasing parental engagement among groups of parents who find that challenging with the schools for a number of different reasons. But I mean, yeah, but but are there other sort of outcomes that you're looking for out of this piece of work? And also, I suppose, really, I think this, I mean, do you see that there's a tension really between schools being outward looking and engaging with parents and welcoming their input, and the other responsibilities that schools have got, and the danger of certain groups of parents dominating? Sorry, I probably broke the chair's rule in relation to answering 2 questions, but if any thoughts on that, would be most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. And Can I just come in actually and say, Thierry, I'm going to suggest that your question is put to Councillor Bramble when we've got her question and answer coming up in item 7, because she'll be talking specifically about mental health. And I think that she might be able to give you a better answer in the context of that item. Are you happy with that? Because I don't think Deborah would necessarily feel prepared to answer that question in this item. Is that okay, Thierry?
Yes, but what time is that? Because I do have to pop off at 7:45.
Okay, you might miss. It's likely that you're going to miss that. However, as it's being recorded, we'll be sure to send you the recording so that you can see the response to that question. So it was about Senko's training in relation to mental health in schools. I'll be sure to ask that for you. Is that okay?
Yep, that's perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Thierry. And in which case, we'll go to Salma. I think we're still going to leave it there for questions, actually, for this item, please.
Hi, Deborah. I was just going to ask about best practice and how that's shared, how that's filtered down to parents, and how that's shared across Hackney, but also how we looked at other boroughs in relation to parental engagement.
Over to you, Deborah.
I'm going to start with your last question, if I can, Salma. Thank you very much for your questions. That is one of my.
Oh no, you've frozen, Deborah. I don't know if you can hear us.
There is a lot of good practice. What I'd like to do as well is start a network, and I'm launching that at the Head Teachers Conference on Friday. And I've also penciled in a date whereby senior leaders, the named person in each school for parental engagement, will be able to come together in a network meeting across the academic year and share what has gone well and what is going well. I also want to embark on just writing short one-side case studies that also support best practice in terms of going forward. In terms of evaluating outcomes, an example, and yes, it's hard, but I think essentially, ultimately, we want to see and ensure that our children make progress and the outcomes for them are the best possible. And in doing so, we definitely will need to involve parents. So, for example, a group that I'm currently working with in in 2 schools actually have identified 2 groups of year 8 in the respective schools, and both these year 8 groups they just happen to be boys and they are underperforming. And so the idea is to work with those parents in terms of initially listening to them and then moving forward with regards to a variety of sessions, attainment, what attainment looks like, how ensuring that parents understand how valuable, invaluable they are in terms of moving their children forward in schools. So outcomes for me will look, or the evaluation process will look slightly different, and I will be leaning on schools to gauge feedback from their parents in terms of how involved they feel, how engaged they feel, and the better the aspirations the parents have for the school, the better the aspirations the child has for themselves. So again, I would really hope to see that in the outcomes, and also schools taking direct feedback from parents. In terms of schools being more outward facing, this is something that I think is most definitely something that schools need to focus on and are happy. I've floated this idea about schools being a hub. The school is the hub of the community. And if we don't know what is out there in our community, we are not very likely to be able to serve them serve our students very well. So schools providing the space for community organisations to come in, or for parent representatives to parents, is something that I'm also looking at. So schools being outward facing, ensuring that they know what organisations are out there, and so it shows that the school is engaging the parents, and the parents are engaging, because we're bringing the community in to talk to parents, or we're bringing parents in to talk to parents, and they are likely to hopefully see a bond there and ensure that the school is outward facing in order to move things forward in school for students and their and parents. Thank you. I don't know if you want to add to anything, Annie.
No, thanks very much, Deborah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both. It was really helpful and insightful. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this item, it's something that, to be honest, actually throughout all of the work that we do, we hear quite a lot about not just the voice of the young people, but also the voice of parents. These are service users really for us as a local authority in terms of what we are delivering to children and young people. And the voice of parents and young people are integral to the work that we do also as a commission. So whenever many of the different items that we have, the reviews that we do, include the parent voice quite strongly. And we've been hearing that there is a need for the parent voice to come through a bit more, to be heard, for parents to feel that there is a space for them to be heard. So it's really encouraging to hear this work, and I'm sure that other commission members would agree that we'd probably love to hear an update from you in due course to see the progress that you've made in this regard. So thank you so much, and hopefully we'll hear from you as a commission again later on this year, perhaps, or next year. So thank you for joining us, Deborah. Now moving on to item 5, which is school improvement partners. So the school improvement partner, or SIP, as you're probably going to hear it being referred to. And can I just say at this point that there are a few people who've said, can we stop using acronyms? Many of us in the room might know what the acronyms mean, but there might be people who are logging in online, members of the public, who won't. So please assume that...
I'm not objecting to acronyms per se. I'm saying that the first time they...
The first reference to it, yes.
Must be in full, and with the acronym afterwards in brackets.
Yes, agreed. So if we can just be clear about what the acronym stands for when we first make reference to it, that would be really helpful. So the School Improvement Partner Programme assists schools to develop higher standards of leadership and management expertise. Dedicated advisors work with schools to assess and improve how well students are performing, the quality of teaching and learning, management and leadership. Given the importance of school improvement partners in improving attainment and closing the attainment gap, the Commission have requested an update from Hackney Education, which sets out the role and function of the school improvement partners and how they support local schools to improve. For this item, we have Stephen Hall, who is the Assistant Director of Schools, Standards and Improvement, and again, Annie Gammon, the Director of Education. We don't have as many minutes now for this item as we did before, so can I just ask officers to very briefly outline key information from the attached slides, ideally within about 5 minutes if you can, assuming that we've all seen the slides, and then we can have about 20 minutes for questions and summing up. Thank you. Handing over to you, Stephen and
Thank you.
Annie.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, education is flooded with acronyms, so I shall try my best, my very, very best, to avoid them. Essentially, we have about 14 school improvement partners who work with Hackney schools at 81 Hackney schools. 7 of those are leadership and management advisors, so directly employed with Hackney Education, but we also use sessional, so existing head teachers to do it too. We also work with around 30 schools in other boroughs, and they trade for that, so they pay for that service so we can go in and support them as well. And it also links to all those other areas that I've outlined in the slides that have been shared with you today. And the School Improvement Partner Programme is very much the core support that all the maintained schools get. Academy schools and free schools only get 2 visits a year, and they get a shorter visit unless they buy into the service. So there's a bit of a disparity there. But the large majority of schools are maintained schools and therefore receive this service. They're graded according to their need, but most schools are getting that 3 3 visits per year, and there's one each term, essentially, the autumn, the spring and the summer. Each has one different focus, so we'll look at a different thing, but there's common threads that go across all 3, and one of those is the performance of key groups and the performance of pupils. And another one will be anything related to risks for the school, and any school priorities the school has. We'll be following those and tracking those through the year in terms of educational priorities, as well as anything else that comes out. And one of those things, as you know, that's coming through is about pupil numbers and so forth, and the challenges that feeds in. So as part of that, we're talking about vulnerable groups, including pupils with special educational needs, looked after children, children with a social worker, and other groups that traditionally, ethnic groups that traditionally don't perform as well as other groups in Hackney, and specifying those and tracking those and asking the school to present what they're doing. We also look at exclusions and track exclusions. So each visit will have a conversation about and challenge where we think exclusions are a concern. And these visits are very much about support, guidance, but also challenge where we see things coming through that we're concerned about. They also inform a broader picture for us across Hackney about what the state of affairs is for schools. It's difficult, so we can orientate our support around that, and also identify where there's particular schools where there's a concern. And we have a process whereby if we're alerted to a school where there's a concern, and that could be through the school partner alerting centrally and saying, a bit worried about this school, there's a risk here, or it could be through the school themselves saying, actually, we need some help here. Then we meet with those schools and those head teachers and chairs of governors and work with them to coordinate the support around them. But essentially, schools are primarily autonomous. They set their own budgets, they have their own governing board, they're held to account by Ofsted every 4 years. So really our change is through influence, it's through nudging, and it's only if we've got really serious concerns that we would constitute our intervention powers. So we do have statutory intervention powers if we were really concerned about our school. We can appoint additional governors, we could suspend the budget, we can issue a formal warning notice or appoint a completely new governing board. In all of those cases, we would then have to involve the Regional Schools Commissioner, and therein lies a tension between local authority schools and the academy system, whereby where we're not keen for all of our schools to become academies. Therefore, we'd rather avert that, and obviously we'd rather avoid a situation where a school is in difficulty in the first place. 96% of our schools are graded good or better by Ofsted. I mean, the London average is 93 and nationally it's 86, so we're doing very well. Our key groups typically perform better than those nationally too. Our schools are very ambitious, our head teachers are very ambitious, and throughout the pandemic, I think that really showed. They're showing the same level of ambition now for pupils that they had 2 years ago before the pandemic. We've got some evidence of where we've provided curriculum resources that have worked well. We have a wellbeing and mental health programme that's been rolled out across all the schools, and that's working in partnership with the NHS. But our challenges are really that central government policy about the vulnerability in the maintained sector, about academisation and so forth, and maintaining that dialogue with those various stakeholders such as the DfE. And also making sure that school leaders themselves can recognise those key issues and weaknesses, because they're the people who can make the change, they're the people who can really enact it. So it's about supporting them to see where there's challenges, but also recognising where there's best practice and sharing that as well. And another challenge at the moment is for our smaller schools, particularly with the falling roles in primary schools, and those external pressures that brings and finance and so forth, and of course the increasing numbers of SEND people. So all of those areas are areas that we explore as school improvement partners, but each school has very much got its own context in terms of how that's impacting their capacity they have to deal with that. And we orientate our support in relation to that. So the greater the need, the greater support we provide, obviously, and the less need, the more they're left to do things, but we still check in with these visits. So it ends up with a report that gets sent to the school, the governing body, and it's a two-sided report for each visit. It basically outlines what was found, what suggestions were and actions are, and so forth, and then feeding in to the next visit.
Thank you very much for that, Stephen. Really, really helpful. We hear a lot about school improvement partners, or SIPs, and we talk a lot in these meetings about the local authorities' relationship to schools. And I think it's clear that school improvement partners are integral to that. So it's really important, I think, and helpful for us to get a sense of the role of school improvement partners, especially for us as a commission to be mindful of that when we're thinking about recommendations that we make in relation to our Hackney education offer to young people in the borough. Do I have any questions from the commission? I might kick us off actually, and if others have any questions, please do raise your hands. Stephen, I hope you don't mind if we take them in threes. But I have a question that's about, so you've mentioned that schools have autonomy and that the role essentially of the school improvement partners is to influence and nudge, I think, as you said. I suppose what I'm thinking about is the standards that we're holding the schools to. What informs those standards? Are we strictly adhering to Ofsted? Do we have our own set of expectations as a local authority in terms of, I know that there are lots of themes that have come through in our work, certainly about inclusion, for example, and exclusion, of course, in relation to special educational needs, disproportionality. Do we have standards that we feel are Hackney standards that are distinct potentially from Ofsted standards? Because I think it would be quite helpful for us to know what they are. What are we holding our schools to? So that's my question. And then Joe, we have a question from Joe.
Thank you. Hi, Stephen. My question was regarding the number of academies who actually engage with more than the basic 2 short visits a year. I don't know if you have that, those numbers, if you're able to tell us that, because particularly at secondary level, obviously that has quite a big implication because the majority of our secondary schools are academies rather than maintained schools. So the level of influence and leverage, if you like, I suppose is what I'm getting at, is to what extent are we able to do that? And if I may be very cheeky, as there aren't a lot of questions, and add in another question regarding, is there any scope for extending the school improvement partner programme into alternate provision use in the borough? I know there's a big piece of work going on in SEND at the moment about accountability and standards in that area, and is that something that's being talked about as an area of work for our school improvement partners? Thank you.
I'll leave you with those 3, Stephen.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a really good question to ask what's informing our standards in terms of the Hackney standards. And we are informed by Ofsted standards, and that's a, it's a given as a handbook there. It's very clear about what Ofsted expects to see in terms of the curriculum design and so forth. We're also informed by national benchmarks in terms of national exam outcomes, but then Hackney exam outcomes tend to be a bit higher. So we always place it a bit higher than that. So when schools are target setting, we're expecting them to be target setting within the top 20% of schools nationally, not within the rest of the quartiles. So we're sort of aiming high to keep ambition high. And to be fair, most of our schools do that without any thoughts. I think there are Hackney themes that are threaded through this. So certainly diversity, ensuring that the curriculum is diverse and representative. We've also had conversations about the diversity of school teams, as in the staff team, and also the governance. Those have been discussions that we've had. Also about SEND and exclusions, and you mentioned both of those. There's some very nuanced discussions that happen in terms of Hackney and the specific challenges that schools are facing in terms of increasing numbers of need and increasing amount of need. But we also work in terms of partners with our SEND team and so forth, so we have quite good links, so we're able to broker some of that support and also share those conversations. And I think you mentioned earlier about it being about relationships, and you're absolutely right. There's a real relationship of trust between a school improvement partner and a school, and that's how you influence best, is because they're respected and trusted. They're all ex-school leaders. They've all been there on the front line. They know how tough it can be, and it's using that platform. And I think by being in that position to be able to be a mediator almost between some other Hackney services and schools also helps with that. So I think there's an expectation in Hackney that we're not just aiming for average or mediocre, we're aiming for the very top bar in everything. And because we have so many examples of schools in Hackney that are at that sort of top bar of outstanding and doing a lot of great things, it's easy to signpost and say, there's no excuse here. We've got other schools that are doing it. Why aren't you? So yeah, I think in terms of our standards are informed by national standards, but also we have our own nuances to that. I think the second question was about, sorry, I can't read my own handwriting, isn't that so? Oh, how many secondaries are buying into, or how many schools are buying into the programme? So we have about 3 secondary academies buying into the programme. We have about 6 maintained secondaries, so over half are part of this programme. But I think it's worth saying that the others very much invest in the process. So we have 2 visits a year for the others, so in the autumn and the summer term. So they're not turning us away. We are going in, and some of those that don't buy into the programme buy into other aspects of our support. So they'll have the wellbeing and mental health support, or they'll have curriculum reviews or SEND reviews and so forth. So the School Improvement Partner Programme is one mechanism by which we go into schools and temperature check, but there are lots of other ways that we can also go into schools. So we try and use those too. So any academies in Hackney who are saying, no, you can't come in, they're all welcoming us in. And we are getting in and making it our business to get in. And I think that's a healthy thing. But by the same token, we can't force them to buy into this more intensive programme. And it's interesting you talk about APs or alternative provision, because, and Annie may be able to answer this better, but in terms of alternative provision, it's very much a sort of cross-borough concern. So it doesn't just sit with Hackney. That alternative provision providers tend to be utilised by a range of different Hackney boroughs. So there's cross-borough partnerships that undertake that quality process for alternative providers, a QMET process, whereby representatives from each borough, I understand, will go in and look. However, we are involved in terms of the logistics of that or the strategy for that. We've certainly been having conversations about that and about that process within our teams, and using our expertise to guide and support and challenge in terms of that. So it's very much a live topic, I think. I don't know, Anne, if you wanted to say something more about that.
Yeah, and I would say that we're probably stepping up our involvement with alternative providers in the light of some of the recommendations from this group. There were a range of recommendations about alternative providers. So we will certainly be more involved alongside our colleagues from New Regents, who are often the commissioners for alternative provision. We are also reaching out further to offer some elements of to some of our, many independent schools in the north of the borough, where we are building closer relationships with those schools as well, and offering support about, for instance, literacy and numeracy.
What can you say? I couldn't hear you properly. Many what in the north of the borough? Just schools?
Independent schools in the Orthodox Jewish community. So there are around 26. There are 26 independent schools in Hackney, which over 20 are in the Orthodox Jewish community.
Thank you very much. Another round of questions now, please. I'm going to start with Councillor Gordon, then Councillor Young. Councillor Hanson, did you say?
Yes, please.
Yes, and then Councillor Hanson. Councillor Gordon. Sorry, you're on mute, Councillor Gordon.
Thanks very much for the presentation, Stephen. Just, I think maybe following on from our previous item, in terms of school improvement partnership, do you do any work to try and to hear from stakeholders like parents, carers, and other stakeholders in relation to schools, to hear their views and sort of their input into your work, and also if there is a what is your relationship with Ofsted? If there is a sort of divergence of views between Hackney and Ofsted, how are those sort of potential conflicts resolved if they ever occur? Thank you.
We've got Councillor Young, please.
I was also sort of following on from the previous item, thinking about the relationship between the school improvement partner and the staff in the school. So forgive me, so I've only ever seen this in a primary school, so I can only think of it in a primary school setting. I just wondered how much work the improvement partner does with all of the frontline staff, as opposed to just the school leadership, because there can be quite a difference between the experience of the leadership and the experience of the frontline staff.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Hanson.
Thanks, Chair. I was just looking at page 28 of the slide deck we were sent about the statutory powers to intervene. I mean, presumably this is just in relation to maintained schools, is it? Because you mentioned academies sort of buying into the service, but would you be able to issue an academy with a warning notice?
Handing over to you, Stephen.
Thank you. In terms of working with other stakeholders, so our visits will involve a conversation with the pupils. So pupil voice is very much a part of that. So getting a group of pupils in a room, speaking to them about specific areas of the curriculum or their experience in the school. We'd also be curious what the school does to gather parent surveys and so on. But again, this is advisory support, so it wouldn't be appropriate for the school improvement partner to meet with parents directly. It slightly puts them odds of the school in a sense, but that'd be of interest in terms of if there are any successes or challenges, and that's certainly some of the work that Deborah's doing as well, is celebrating where those things are being done well and gathering some of that. I have to say we have a good relationship with Ofsted. We understand the framework, we understand where it's coming from. Our role is to make sure that schools know how to navigate that inspection process, that they're prepared, that they present themselves in the best light. So we don't really have divergence of views with Ofsted typically, that if their grading is typically what we would think it would be. However, we certainly have conversations with Ofsted, or where we think the inspection process has not been followed properly, or we were concerned about that, we certainly have routes to escalate that. So to speak directly with them and say, this inspection didn't go right, and this is why we think it didn't go right, and these are things that we think didn't follow the inspection handbook appropriately. But Ofsted tend to funnel complaints about specific inspections through their own complaints process. We do have a role of escalation. We'd also meet with the inspector when they inspect the school in Hackney. We would go and speak with them, and we'd also typically attend the final feedback on the second day. And certainly if we had concerns about the process there, we would be alerting that to Ofsted and making them clear. We also sometimes mediate with complaints from Ofsted. So if there's a complaint that comes through to Ofsted and it comes back to us to respond to. So there's a number of ways in which we engage with them. And this support from school improvement partners is very much about leadership and management support. So it's about strategic advisory support for the school. But we also have another layer of consultants underneath who are very much class facing in terms of pedagogy or teaching techniques. And those are the people who would be asking to come in and support, for example, to speak or lead training days for staff, or to lead sessions with staff. The same with wellbeing and mental health. Some of our team deliver those to teaching teams. But in terms of working directly with teachers, the school improvement partners, as I said, are more about leadership and management support, as opposed to gathering a health check in the same way that Ofsted perhaps would through their staff interviews. And in terms of statutory powers of intervention, yeah, unfortunately, this only applies to maintained schools. Our hands are very much tied on that. I don't know, Annie, if you wanted to say something about that too.
No, that's what I assumed, Chair. I just think that the slide deck doesn't make that clear, really. I think it would be helpful to make that distinction.
But I think it would also be right to say that we can raise concerns with the Regional Schools Commissioner, and they would take that seriously if we did so. So if there was a concern about an academy, our first route would be to the head teacher or principal, and then perhaps to the executive head if there was still a concern that we had, and then to the Regional Schools Commissioner. So that channel of communication is open to us, although we can't write the letter ourselves. Right.
That's a quick follow-up. Sure. You mentioned, hi Stephen, you mentioned that it wouldn't be appropriate to meet with parents. I can see that on a kind of one-to-one basis, but the school improvement partner wouldn't ever attend a PTA meeting or anything to get a flavour of parents' views.
I think a school improvement partner would attend a governing body meeting, and I think they would certainly also meet with governors. So that would be another way of temperature checking from a stakeholder point of view. But really, as I said, their role is about advisory strategic support for the provision of education in the school, and less about the gathering of opinion of stakeholders. It's not that kind of reporting.
I mean, since the law on governors changed and governing bodies have become much less representative of the parent body and much more kind of professionalised, I would say that governing bodies are much less representative of stakeholders. They're not really stakeholders in the same way. Sorry, it's a comment, not a question.
Yeah, particularly, I suppose, in light of what we heard from the previous item about the emerging themes that are coming from parents. And I imagine that there probably is some discordance between what children at schools believe to be the priorities, parents and senior leaders, and as you've mentioned, other members of staff at every level of the school. So while I appreciate what you're saying, what the complexities are for you in terms of engaging with a broad range of stakeholders in that way, I can't help but feel that how do we know, how are we able to properly advise our schools if we don't know what parents and children of all levels, those who are more difficult for us to connect with through the usual school council or parent governor channels, experiences, and bearing in mind that these tend to be the children who are, of parents who perhaps don't speak English as a first language, are more likely to be excluded from school, children who have special educational needs. It does feel to me as though that ought to be something that we should explore. So we've got another question from Shabnam. I've just got a follow-up, so because I asked my question first, I'm a bit worried that you might not remember what that was about, but just to go back to my question again about our Hackney specific standards, I wanted to ask quite specifically about exclusions, because it's quite clear that the role of school improvement partners in increasing the academic attainment in our schools across the board. We've seen that over the past few years. But what we've also seen is consistently high rates of school exclusions in Hackney. And I suppose I just wanted to hear from you what that work has looked like. And if you have any examples, I think this might be something that we might have to revisit, perhaps, maybe with a supplementary paper from the school improvement partners on any successes in that area, because as I said, it's clear what we've been able to achieve in terms of attainment, but it does feel as though we do have some entrenched challenges within our schools in terms of disproportionality, school exclusions, attainment gaps between children with special education needs and children from some ethnic groups. So yes, just wondering if you could tell us if you've got any success stories there about challenges and support that you've offered to schools in that area. And then I think, Shabnam, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you very much for that. I very much agree with what was said earlier about the SIP visits kind of being very targeted and this not kind of presenting a more comprehensive understanding of where schools are at, especially in terms of pupil voice and parent voice. Sorry, I actually just wanted to ask, the SIP visits, are they scheduled? I mean, how much advance notice is given of a SIP visit? And how does this, how are you able to kind of gain an understanding of leadership with something that is kind of prearranged, if you see what I'm saying? Because it's quite easy to present something and not get not kind of scratch beneath the surface, if you see what I'm saying.
Over to you, Stephen. Thanks, Trevor.
Yeah, sure. In terms of exclusions, I think what we could indicate is this is a cross-service concern. So it's not school improvement partners directly influencing exclusions, that it comes across multiple services that worked on this, and that's where the role of the school improvement partner comes in handy, because they're the people who can mediate some of those conversations with the other services, such as the wellbeing team, also influence ideas about having behaviour reviews in schools. So in the last year we've invited schools to have behaviour reviews where we think that they would benefit from that. It's also influenced some of the pastoral work. So I talked about the wellbeing and mental health work. So the pastoral and wraparound work that goes around that, about understanding the child and the child's why the child's initiating what they're initiating and why they're behaving in the way they are, or that sense of belonging. All of those things come through a much broader spectrum of work. So the school improvement partner will be interested in the cold hard data in terms of your exclusions are way higher than national, or your exclusions are not coming down. Here are the groups that are not being who are disproportionately represented in your data. What are you doing about it? Are you aware of it? What are you doing about it? What strategies have you tried? What haven't you tried? What's working? What isn't working? To really put a spotlight on it. But again, the SIP role is an advisory role. It's an influencer. It's not about holding the school to account. So this is about advising the school. Well, have you thought about doing this or that? Or I saw this working very well in this school. Have you tried that? Or it could be about a specific focus of meeting with the behaviour leads in the school, talking with them about their systems and what the school does in terms of the pastoral support for students or the behaviour support for students, and doing more of a deep dive into that. So I think the role of the SIP is part of the system there in terms of just reducing exclusions, and certainly we wouldn't expect the SIP to directly be reducing exclusions in the school, but be the one providing information that feeds into other services, acting as a mediator, and also putting a spotlight on that. I don't know, Annie, if there was anything you wanted to add to that.
I think certainly the SIPs, and particularly at secondary level, are extremely well aware of the issues and will raise this with head teachers. And as Stephen said, we'll bring in a range of other colleagues. So we work closely with the pastoral deputies in that situation as well. And I think Helena Burke has talked to this group before about that work. I would also say that we work in some other ways. So for instance, sometimes, and this is true of academies as well as maintained schools, school improvement partners will be governors, and will be able to challenge through the governing body. I think that's a really important role alongside the role of all governors, but also local authority governors on governing bodies. So I think there is a range of ways of focusing that work. But I think you are right, and I think Stephen's emphasising the role of the SIP is quite closely with the head teacher to influence the head teacher and get them to shift practice, because they own all of that and the whole tapestry of what goes on in the school, and we can influence them, and we have seen that change. So we've seen a number of schools change. For give an example, Cardinal Pole, where fixed term exclusions have dropped dramatically over the past years. There's been a really significant change there, but there are other schools as well where exclusions have dropped, particularly the fixed term exclusions.
Thank you, Annie. And in terms of the second question, just to reframe what a school improvement partner does, it's not an Ofsted process. It's not about holding the school to account. It's advisory support for the school. It's about giving the school a fresh pair of eyes, and giving the head teacher the kind of challenge that they're going to act on, and lead them by the hand sometimes, but also to identify and celebrate where a school's doing something very well, to be able to go back and inform other schools and other partners about that. So it's not about catching the school out. It's not about cold, hard accountability. I mean, I guess Ofsted is more of a role for that, but even they don't go into a school blindly in that sense. So the visits are arranged with the school, but the activities on the visit are very much arranged around not just sitting in a room and chatting with the head and having tea and biscuits, but getting out, looking at the books, going into classrooms, meeting with a range of leaders. So it won't just be the head teacher, it'll be a range of different curriculum leaders and pastoral leaders across the school, talking with pupils, really getting under the skin and unpicking things. And our school improvement partners are all, as I said, experienced school leaders, so they know all the tricks, they know all the areas to look at, but they also know where things are being done particularly well. So it's about the questions they ask, about asking the right questions to the right people, and then putting that in a way back to the head teacher where the school feels empowered enough to act on it. Again, if the school themselves have a governing body that holds them to account, they need to be the ones engendering the change. Engender the change, they have to buy into it, understand where it's coming from, and understand where the concerns may be coming from, and that has to be evidence-based. It has to be from, I've seen this today, and this suggests that this is a systemic issue perhaps in your school you want to look at, and here's some ways in which you might like to do it. And we can support with that further if you need it, or you might want to, go to other partners and do that. So it's more about I think one of the criticisms of Ofsted is they appear once every 4 years, they tell you what you're doing wrong, and then they disappear again and don't offer anything else. And one of the strengths of our approach is we appear every term. So we're coming in, and we're also on the end of a phone all year round. So we get phone calls from head teachers, all year round, particularly during the pandemic, and we're a form of support there as well. So, the advisory support in the way is about getting under the skin of the school through those techniques of looking and having an informed look, asking the right questions, and then framing that in a way that is manageable and strategic for the school.
Thank you very much for that, Stephen. I think we're going to bring that item to a close. Although I feel as though this has been really helpful for us. It's been really helpful for us to have a overview of what the role of school improvement partners and the relationship that school improvement partners have to our schools. I think, from my perspective, I'm not sure about other members of the Commission, I think it would be really useful for us to have a case study, to have a sense of how we are grappling with, and I fully appreciate what you say about us not holding schools to account, but I suppose I am thinking again about some of the more challenging areas that we're experiencing, and about it would be quite useful for us to see, it may well be a case study of a success story of communicating or advising our schools successfully on an issue like school exclusions or attainment gaps or anything of, like any of the challenges that we know that are entrenched for us in Hackney that we're grappling with. I don't know if others think that might be quite helpful for us, and I think we can then maybe explore a bit further what we've been saying about stakeholder engagement, because I think it does keep coming up as being a recurring challenge for us, I think. And I think that may in part be because you've got a lot of parents on the Commission, you've got lots of people who are either school governors, people who receive casework from parents, and we can't help but get a sense that there can be a bit of discordance between what parents and children are saying about schools versus the messaging that we get from schools. And it feels as though we need to find a way of creating space for all of those voices somehow. So yeah, it will be something that we can have a think about. But thank you so much. We'll now be moving on to our next item, which is item 6, the Cabinet Q&A. Nicely timed, Councillor Bramble. I would like to welcome the Deputy Mayor and Cabinet Member for Children, Education and Children's Social Care, Councillor Antoinette Bramble, to the meeting for her annual Q&A with the Commission. As many people will be aware, the mental health of children and young people has been very much in the news, particularly in relation to the impact that COVID-19 and multiple lockdowns may have had on the emotional well-being of our children and young people. The Commission also noted that this was flagged as a local concern by the City and Hackney Safeguarding Partnership in recent reporting to us. In this context, the Commission has agreed to focus questions with the Cabinet Member on local mental health services and support to children and young people. The Commission is, of course, aware that children's mental health is a shared responsibility across local government, the CCG and voluntary sector, and is supported by integrated commissioning arrangements. The aim of our questions here is to understand more about the number and nature of referrals to local services, waiting times and access to mental health services, improving accessibility of local services, and ensuring vulnerable groups have access to mental health services. There are 3 areas of questioning that are fully set out on the agenda. We have 45 minutes for this item, so we're going to split this item into 3 with 15 minutes for each. So if we can have 5 minutes with Councillor Bramble to just set out responses to each of the areas, and then we can have 10 minutes for questions. So if we can take it in turn in that way, that would be most helpful. So if we can start with the first one, which is demand for CAMS and waiting times in Hackney.
So, Chair, if I may be a little bit cheeky, just to go back to the previous item, only because Councillor Woodley and I, when we were in Cabinet, were speaking and welcoming the report of the Scrutiny Commission on exclusions, and actually the helpfulness and the timeliness of that in terms of addressing COVID and school exclusions and the importance of what you do in scrutiny, and it was really helpful. And also just reminding myself and colleagues the importance of the work that we do. I think that in a moment in time, 10 years from now, people will look back and be horrified to know that some children were excluded because of the colour of their skin. So we have to ensure the work that we do now sits on the right time of history. And I just want to welcome you and thank you for what you do here in Scrutiny. So thank you for that. But commend the work that's going on in schools and officers. And I have to say, Chair, our primary schools have not permanently excluded children for 4 years now, and I think there's lessons to be learned about how we transcend that into secondary. But welcome the good work that's going on. It's really important to acknowledge that. So in terms of demand for CAMS, I suppose I now have 4.5 minutes, Chair, so I will make sure that I stick to time as much as I can. So referrals, if you don't know, go to the East London Foundation Trust CAMS Specialist Services, and CAMS is Children and Adults Mental Health Service, if you don't know that. And basically, a quarter, you will see maybe about 400 referrals into that service. Due to the pandemic, that doubled to 800. So that's a significant amount of pressure on the service. And then what you'll find is that about 18% of children are diagnosed with a mental health condition, and that it's gone from 18%, it used to be 8%, so again, you'll see nearly a double in that. And I suppose what you'll find is that some children, whether it's transition, whether it's grief, whether it's a traumatic experience in the home or outside of the home, all of that, you can imagine, is now compounded with the experience of the pandemic. So you find that children and young people that maybe wouldn't experience those things because of what they've experienced through the pandemic is now compounded then, hence the rise. The challenge isn't just the amount of the increase in the referral, it's also maintaining professionals and clinicians in the service, because there's been a decline. So that is adding tensions within that. What I will say is that in Hackney, it's no surprise that historically we've invested more in this area and have put growth into the system. So although there is a challenge, it isn't the same tension that's seen across London or indeed outside of the country. That doesn't mean to say that there isn't challenges, and there's an at-risk register held across the system to help mitigate and manage those risks all the time. So if we want to talk about some of the national indicators, 95% of children and young people with eating disorders are seen within 4 weeks. If it's really urgent, because I can imagine people's hearts dropping, if it's really urgent, that's within a week to get their week's need. Sometimes we're not meeting that 4-week requirement, which is really troubling, I'll be honest, but then you can understand the context of the challenges that I set out before. So what's been done is that a summit has been held with the service to really meet with partners to think about how do we mitigate not meeting those targets and what happens to those children and families within that period of time until we meet that need. That also is making sure that we work with VCS, so that's the voluntary and community services. I'm really trying to train myself, Chair, not to say an acronym without explaining it. It's the teacher in me, so bear with me. And it's also working with our parents as well in the schools to make sure that we're having the new and right interventions at the right time, but also to bring awareness of what's out there and what can be accessed within the interim, and that's really important. At least 50% of young people that have the first psychotic episode are seen within the 2-week referral period. I'm really relieved to say that requirement is currently met, which is really good. 75% of our young people that are referred to talking therapists start their treatment within 6 weeks, which is positive. We have a target of 5 weeks that often sometimes is not getting met, again because of the increase in the surveys, but it's not an excuse and it's certainly not being complacent. So talking a bit about how we compare against other boroughs, I suppose it's bittersweet really, Chair, because Hackney has the shortest wait times in England, which is to be acknowledged. We have, in terms of the North and East London service, we have the shortest wait time in the country, which is brilliant. We are the 6th best performer when you look at the performance indicator, and there's lots of different measures, but the Education Commissioner said that we are the 6th highest in the country, and in London we're in the top 10 performers and the only London authority in that. So while you know I wear the Hackney t-shirt, Chair, and always want to celebrate how well we're doing in Hackney, in the context of children needing help, there's still issues, it's still a challenge, and actually, so there's, while I'm proud to say Hackney's doing well in those indicators, I'm certainly not complacent because some children are still waiting longer than they need to get the help that they need. So I think I've got about a few more minutes, Chair. So there's also some support in the system that while children and young people are waiting, thinking about referral support and what can happen in the interim, but it has to be on a case-by-case and individual basis, because actually you don't want to undermine any work that could be preempted or that has to happen, and actually sometimes to start for children may be a trigger which is unhelpful for children and young people. So the specialists have to do that work and do that quite carefully. I've spoke about the indicators and the measures and how well Hackney's doing there. And what the team has done is there's an extensive action plan. So there's the national healthcare plan that's set out nationally, and then locally we have our own plan that we're working through to come and meet some of those indicators. I'm going to pause there, Chair. I think I'm within the time.
Thank you very much.
She says confidently, not knowing at all if she's going to the time. There we go.
Over to the Commission for questions then. We've got Councillor Sizer, Councillor Selman, and Ernell, please. Councillor Sizer.
Thank you so much for the report, and it's heartening to hear the good news within that of how well Hackney's doing. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Just a couple of things. One is a question and one is a comment, I think. We're in light of the pandemic, just thinking in terms of the more hidden side of the CAMS referrals, the things that have maybe through the pandemic gone under the radar a little more. Thinking back to our previous discussion about children of alcoholics, certainly eating disorders. How are we preparing for the probably the increase in numbers that we can expect? But also, is there any work about sort of bringing out some of the more hidden issues that are there and likely to surface? And then the second thing is literally just a comment. With eating disorders, there's been, as I'm sure you'll know, a sort of a push to recognise that eating disorders shouldn't always be monitored via BMI, and just to sort of really hope that Hackney is following that guidance and that line of thought around eating disorders, so that we're not just looking for quite an old-fashioned set of external criteria, but that we can be moving with the current thinking on that as well. So any thoughts on that as well?
Thank you very much. Councillor Selman.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Deputy Mayor Ramble. It was just on the statistic about the essentially the increase in the doubling in demand. I just wondered within that if you had any sort of further detail on whether there's been any change within that in terms of the nature of the need coming through or demographics coming through, or if it's similar makeup of need, but more. And then it partly tying into Councillor Sizer's question, it's a bit unknown unknowns, but do we have a sort of projection of the extent of other unmet needs that we don't know about, and what that kind of looks like?
Thank you very much. And then lastly, Nell.
Thank you, Councillor Bamble, for your report. Very glowing report. That's very positive. And you also talk about other hidden factors. And the hidden factors that I'm raising is around the prospect of the local authority having to cater for increase in refugees from as a result of the current crisis in oh gosh, I've forgotten the name.
Ukraine.
In Ukraine, yeah. And obviously we'll be expecting children who are really traumatized as a result of what they've experienced and what they've seen. And obviously there will be an impact on the stretched camp services. Has the council made any provisions for extra funding? And also, are there any plans of how these situations will be dealt with?
If you don't mind, can I be really cheeky and ask you to take a question from Joe as well, and then we can move on to the next question if possible. Joe, please.
Thank you. My question was regarding access by some of our more vulnerable groups. It's really heartening to hear these performance indicators are putting us very high in all these league tables. But I guess we know there are cohorts of young people who might be struggling to even get that far. And then there's a secondary issue of you might get your referral, you might get in front of CAMHS, but to what extent are those young people getting the most appropriate therapy for them? For example, groups of autistic young people who don't have a learning disability will be offered cognitive behavioural therapy, but it's quite known that that actually doesn't work terribly well for large numbers of autistic young people. And so I suppose I'm wondering, what qualitative indicators do we have about how impactful the CAMHS offer is, and have we got in our line of sight some of our more vulnerable groups, who come from poorer socioeconomic backgrounds, LGBT backgrounds, neurodiverse children? And again, just to mention the autistic community, I mean, one study showed 10 to 14-year-old adolescent autistic young people, of those, 71% will have a co-occurring mental health condition. They're far more likely to present with eating disorders. Have we got these communities in our line of sight? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair. And myself being cheeky, how could I then not allow you to be cheeky with the 4 questions? So I will start with Councillor Sizer. So you asked about the hidden increase and how do we uncover that, how do we monitor that, and how do we see that? It's absolutely something that is in the forefront of our minds. Something that I've always been troubled about and continue to badger officers about is delayed trauma. I think that many of us, and including children in that, are on autopilot. Let's get through the pandemic, and then once the pandemic's over, we can start to go back to normal. But actually, in that moment, you're in a heightened state of stress or anxiety and waiting for an outlet. So I think that actually, as we move through the pandemic and we go back to what's called the new normal, which didn't work for a lot of people anyway, to be honest, I think we're going to see more and more need for the service. So it's something that is monitored. We are talking about in dialogue with schools and the voluntary sector, thinking about how we meet that need. And I'll go into more of that as we go forward. So there is a crisis service now that we have to support that need. We've got a home treatment service that's underway in development to begin to meet that demand and need. There has been an impact on the 1 week wait in terms of some referrals because of those undiagnosed unmet needs, because it's not just the new children through the pandemic, it's all of those other children that may have those needs going forward. So Joe's refugees. So the council's doing a whole piece of work, just to let you know, around supporting refugees. I have to say that Hackney has a strong track record of welcoming refugees into the borough, and that still remains the same. We're acutely aware of children feeling traumatised, and there's a lot of work done in schools around informed trauma training and practice to support children with those needs, and the service as well is looking at how they've got the capacity to meet that needs, and a lot of that will be addressed in our in-house clinician service as well, and hopefully if the questions allow, I'll speak a bit more about that. Joe, in terms of your question, looking at the impact, all of the work that officers do, that clinicians do, that our social workers do, all of it is evidence-based and outcome-orientated, and I can, in a follow-up written response back to you, give you more detail about how that's tracked, how that's monitored. But you can get into a system where you do what you think is right, you can do what's normally available, and you go through a systematic way of working. But actually, everything that the council does has to be informed with the data and evidence and outcome-based. Otherwise, adults spend a lot of time talking about children, and actually the need of children can sometimes get lost. And that way as well, if you follow the data, you ensure you get the right intervention at the right time for the right child, and not get into a road in thinking, okay, this is what we're going to do per school, per family, per area, or, for example, per gender or ethnicity.
And then I think it was just Councillor Salmon's question about demand and the doubling. Do we know what that looks like in terms of the demographics?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because that's some of the things that I wanted to raise. So we haven't really seen a change in the demographic as such. It's been predominantly the same in terms of ethnicity, diversity. What we're finding though is a lot more younger children are coming through in the system in a way that they wasn't before, and it's a good or bad thing, because partly you think, oh my God, it's really horrible to hear younger children needing support, but actually it's a good thing, because if you get that work in early, hopefully you begin to alleviate some of those stress and anxiety that don't develop into long-term anxiety that some children manifest at a young age. But again, that's something maybe I can respond back into more detail in writing. Sure, if that's helpful.
Yeah. Did you?
That was really helpful. I think the other thing was so as well demographics, to understand as well if there was any sort of change in the need in terms of what was coming through, and if that has an impact on the services, the capacity within the service. It's great.
Yeah, no, what I would say is that we're doing some work with the Orthodox Jewish community, and we've actually got a pilot and that's going really well. But again, that's a shift and a change that we didn't necessarily see in our cohorts before.
And then, sorry, the other, and again, if you don't have the data now, that's absolutely fine if it's something to come back. But the other thing is just, and again, I know it's unknown unknowns, but if we have any projections of, if in terms of hidden need, a need that isn't coming forward, if that did come forward, what that would then look like. And I know that's very difficult to measure, but any sense we have in that in terms of projections and
yes, those dreaded unknown unknowns. But I think that really the capacity we need to put back into the system or increase in the system, I would say, is about at least between 10 to 15% at the moment, and we're not quite there yet, because the issue isn't just getting people, it's getting the qualified clinicians, as I said, which has been an issue before. I think where we've got some room to be creative and innovative is that Hackney has an in-house clinician service, which is about a team of 45, and using those officers, trained professionals a bit more is going to be helpful in getting to that direction of travel.
Thank you very much. If we can now move on to the second question, if that's okay. Improving access to CAMS in Hackney.
Can I ask something? Can I ask something?
Did you want to if you've summarised everything, did you want to say anything about that specifically?
I did, only because I just conscious you said you wanted to separate it out, so I'm only going to introduce every question first, then take questions. That's all right. Yeah. But I think Councillor Young is definitely off the bat for the first question.
You might cover it.
I might cover it. Let's see how I do. At the moment, the team is working on a single point of entry system, which may seem obvious, but councils, organisations are complicated and complex beings, if one can refer to the entity in that way. So we're just looking at how to simplify that referral service, and that is going really well. And I remember I referenced on the back of Councillor Selman's very articulate question, the capacity we're looking to increase is 15 between 20%. So hopefully a lot of those unknowns, those hidden children, as we go through the pandemic and things look and feel differently, as we begin to see that increased need, hopefully as we build that up, we'll be able to decrease waiting time and quicken response time. One thing actually some campaign groups, charities have been campaigning for is health hubs, and I would say that I disagree with that. I think in their dialogue and conversations with community, they're saying that that's what they should have. We haven't seen locally here in Hackney the evidence and the data to say that's the right move at the moment. Just thinking that the work we do in schools and our existing provision seems to be meeting the need. It's the demand that we're working on, not meeting the need, but we're always open to that. One model that we do have here in Hackney is called the Cool Down Cafe, and what that does, it brings together, Councillor Solomon is aware of that, it does workshops for children and young people. The power is you have peer-to-peer mental health support, and another young person talking to another young person is really good, but one of the key things it does is it brings professionals together to hopefully help to deal with the stigma around mental health and defy those myths, which is really, really important, and unfortunately still exists quite strongly today. So that's one of the models that we are going through. I will pause there.
Councillor Young, Councillor Hanson, Councillor Selman.
I've got 3 questions. I'm going to just burden you with 2. First is about professionals, and you mentioned quite rightly that we're struggling to keep enough professionals. I just wondered, can you tell us a bit more about what we're doing on that? And my understanding, I know you said that Hackney's put more money into CAMS. My understanding is that CAMS services, not just in Hackney, but across London, if not the country, are extremely financially stretched. So could you also just tell us a bit more about that funding and how that funding is improving access? And I mean, I thought funding had reduced in mental health, and certainly for the longer term therapies, not the shorter term. And that what we've done, because we're very stretched, is to put money into very limited blocks of treatment rather than those kind of long-term treatments. So 1, professionals, 2, money.
Councillor Anderson?
Oh, thank you. I was very interested in what you said about take up and work with the Orthodox Jewish community. I mean, are there particular groups of people where take up is? I mean, I was interested in whether parents were unwilling for their children to be referred in some cases, and what happened in those cases if, say, a school or some relevant professional wanted to refer a child or young person. Do they need their parents' permission?
So in terms of retention and recruitment, there is a strategy, a comms plan, conversation, word of mouth, working really, really hard to do it. It's not something that unique to Hackney, it's London-wide, it's nationwide. It's something that I would urge and continue to urge government to really step in and think about nationally what they do to improve that. So the funding that I spoke to, referenced before, I said it's historic funding. So before there was the cuts that we have now, Hackney and City made a conscious decision to invest more money than really a lot of other local authorities were doing at the time. As a result, we have benefited from that and are still seeing the benefit. for that. But you're right, there is a decline in funding, and it continues to be a challenge. You're right, Councillor Hanson, that one of the things that I should talk about is parental consent. All of these interventions are predicated on parental consent, actually, and sometimes you have to do the work with the parents and have a dialogue with the parents on what you want to provide, why you want to provide it, or why you feel their child may benefit from this intervention before you actually get to children. That's why the work that we do in schools, which is the well-being and health systems that we have in schools, is so helpful for that, where we have, alongside social workers in schools, we have that with health and well-being officers that work in schools as well, where you have that qualified professional in that setting, supporting schools, talking with parents. It normalises having health and well-being and support around schools, coming to see someone, talking to families, talking to children about health and well-being in a more normal setting that doesn't feel so threatening when you go through a referral. It's also below the threshold of an automatic referral as well, and I think that's helpful for parents sometimes as well.
Sorry, Chair, can I just to follow up? So would the child or young person even know that they'd been referred? Or would they know they'd been referred but that their parents had blocked the referral? I'm just thinking, I'm just comparing it with treatment for physical illness, where children can be treated without their parents' consent if it's clearly in their best interest and the parents are withholding consent.
So I think it depends.
I realise it's limited circumstances, but given we're supposed to have parity between physical and mental health, I mean, I'm genuinely interested in what would happen in these circumstances.
So I think it's where the threshold is. So if some children, you know and you can see they need support, but the level of intervention is below that statutory threshold, it has to have parental consent. Obviously, if you can see that a child, depending on where they are, what they're going through, they are at risk of harm, and the parent prevents that, it goes into a different place where that child can be referred, and then you have a dialogue with the parent. So it's all about thresholds and the need of the child. But I think it's an important point that you're raising, Councillor Hanson.
So what's the answer to the question, though?
So the answer to the question is the threshold. So if it's below the threshold, it's with parental consent. If it's above the threshold, an officer, a practitioner will have to do the right thing by that child and refer them into whatever service they feel necessary, and then inform the parent.
Thank you.
Just
Sort of
one
like
last
safeguarding.
One last question. I think you had a question, Councillor Selman, before we move on.
Yeah, so you mentioned about how we don't have the evidence-based around about the recommendations about health hubs and health hubs. I'm just wondering, so as I understand it, we do try and make sure that we've got youth voice at the centre of things. We've done lots of work for the Young Futures Commission. I was just wondering what the evidence base is locally about what young people would like to see in terms of accessing it, bearing in mind what I think you were touching at the beginning, which is that often these are complicated structures and they're not designed around and they're having to fit into it. Sorry,
no, that's all right. Don't apologise. So I suppose there's an array of things that young people are saying to us, and some young people want an online service, some young people want a face-to-face, some young people want support through schools, some children want support through the hubs. So the reason why we have quite a broad offer across the borough is because actually this is what children and young people are saying, and there's no sort of one size fits all, but there's been no data or dialogue that we've heard from young people where they want all of that support together in one place as a hub where everybody goes to. I think if that comes through differently from young people and the evidence says that's the right thing to do, we'll absolutely make that change. And you referenced the work with Young Futures and just want to commend the work that you did while you were leading on that piece of work with me, and thank you for your input. That shapes the way we do things differently with the council, and actually they are definitely an advocate and a beacon for the work that we do around children and young people. And we now have Luke, who is our apprenticeship manager, leading that piece of work and keeping us to task, ensuring that the authentic voice of young people is spoken throughout, and health and wellbeing is no different in that.
Thank you very much. And now moving on to the last one, which is mental health support to vulnerable groups.
So there's an array of offer of support, which I sort of referenced quite lightly before, and the reason why we haven't gone for the route around the hubs yet, waiting on the evidence and the data. When I go through some of the support, you'll see why we haven't done that at that point. So we've got COLT, which is COLT, the online service. So young people just go through an app, and there's no referral, it's just a chat, it's a hangout. You look for the support that you want, you talk to someone, you get guidance. If you need to be referred, they can talk to you about where to go to get that support. We've got the St. Joseph Bereavement Service for children and young people. I reflect on when I did teacher training, I don't think we even touched on bereavement. That was some time ago though, Chair. I have dated myself maybe a decade. This is where you tell me I look too young to be to that age.
Far too young.
Far too young. Thank you, Councillor Young. Copies on me later. But what it is, Chair, there's no thing in teacher training that talks about bereavement, and I'm not sure that we talk about bereavement enough in school. So that is really good. We've got Growing Minds, which is a transformation work stream that the council has done, and it looks at Afro-Caribbean and Caribbean heritage, looking at how you support children's mental health and well-being, cultural competency training. We've got the non-violence resistance training, and that's talking to parents really about different ways to have a consequence for children's behaviour rather than a physical chastisement. We've got the work of the Tree of Life, and that is a non-European, non-Eurocentric view of how we support children and families. So it looks at the context of where the family is, where the children is in terms of their cultural background, and using cultural competency to really work through and then offer support on the back of that, which is really good. We've got the LGBTQI work stream and the work we do through Indigo, supporting children and young people there. We've got the mental health support team. They run an online service that supports schools in terms of delivering training for staff and their health and well-being, but also how that then overlays for the health and well-being of children. We've got the health and well-being mental health strategy and the work that we do with our partners, and that includes pilots in independent schools, which I know many of you, Councillor Selman and Councillor Young, being in the north of the borough, knowing that there are lots of independent schools, I know that you'll be keen to know that that offer is for them as well. We've got CAMS workers working with parents to make sure that we've got the parental voice coming through and the child's voice coming through. Trauma-informed practice is what you're going to hear a lot of people talking about, and that basically, for those that you don't know, it's having an awareness that as due to a upsetting and emotional experience, that anything that you do could be a re-trigger for a child and young person. So it's how you navigate the situation to ensure that you don't bring more trauma to a children and young person. And I mentioned our in-house clinician service, which is about 45 staff, and they are co-located across our service, Hackney, Children and Young Hackney service. And why we have sort of a zero referral time is that because those practitioners are co-located and they are different therapists, different clinicians with a variety of disciplines to meet the variety and complex needs that we have in terms of the children that are coming into the service. Joe, I think I mentioned before the autism spectrum disorder unit, disability unit, which Councillor Woodley is very familiar with. They are there to work with children with autism and children with special educational needs and disabilities to ensure that we've got that specialism within our offer. It's really important that we do that. I mentioned the work with the Orthodox Jewish community, and there's good work going around the co-design of what that service should look like. I could mention more, Chair. The one thing that I would go on to say is the work that's going on in schools, and getting that universal offer is key. I had the opportunity when I used to work in schools to have a social worker in school, and what it did is it allowed me to talk to parents and families a lot quicker and having a healthcare professional that can make a decision on site at the right time. And that's the same way that it's working with the wellbeing and mental health in schools. It's having a practitioner on site that can make decisions, that can give advice, sometimes for individual, but it's more about group work or work with parents on training and looking at a whole holistic view across the school. I think that's really, really important. Young Hackney, I haven't mentioned them, but they do some really good outreach work with our children and young people, whether it's through the hubs, whether it's our outreach work that are directly on the streets, which Councillor Selman would have known about in her previous role, or our day-to-day work with schools. That have to mention, Chair, I did say I was stopping and doing the thing that we do terribly, say one more thing and then do 3-4 more things. Have to mention the substance abuse team as well, that we offer as well, because actually we're talking about mental health and well-being, but sometimes that could be triggered by a substance misuse, either for a parent or a child, or both. I will pause there, Chair.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions from the Commission? I wanted to kick us off actually with a question that we had from Thierry, who is one of our young people who currently isn't, he had to leave earlier, but I said that I would ask this question on his behalf. He had a question around Senkos and whether Senkos in schools are trained to support young people and their mental health and well-being within schools. Do we have any other questions from the Commission? Councillor Young?
There's a quick follow-up question. Just, you mentioned a couple of times that there's a particular project going on in the independent schools in the north of the borough. It'd just be really interesting to hear a bit more about it. Maybe this isn't the time and you want to ask officers to send something afterwards.
Do we have any further questions? No? Okay.
So that's a great question, and I know Terry very well. So Senkos have changed. So just, again, aging myself, just as I was leaving school, Senkos were asked by government to complete a training. So Senkos now have to have a professional training, and that's a government-initiated scheme, which I absolutely welcomed. In Hackney, we also have what's called a Senko forum. So we get all the Senkos across the borough together and they have further development and training and support for them. So there is absolutely training, and we encourage every school to have a designated Senko. Most of that now is held within senior management of the school to think about the importance of that role. I know that Annie is there on the screen, and if there's anything that I'm missing, Annie, do feel free to come off mic to come in. In terms of the work in the independent school, it's more the offer of the training and offering pilots to run in the school, but we can absolutely send some more information on. But it's that kind of tension between there being, Annie and I were talking about this the other day, the tension between them being independent, but also they have our children, and actually there are some things that we just have to draw a line and say we need to deliver and offer these services because of the importance of that. As there aren't any questions, what I would say is that one of the things that I'd say is going well is the support within schools around mental health and wellbeing, having that qualified practitioner in there and it's someone that can make decisions. I don't know about you, but have you ever been in that virtual room and now being back in the physical room where someone has started, no offence to anyone who's started on anyone else's behalf, but you are not the person that can make a decision, and you go off and you disappear and nothing happens? The value of having that qualified professional in the school around mental health and wellbeing, it means that when teachers or head teachers have a query, they can address it and decisions can be made and information can be given straight away, and that's working really well in our schools. I think one of the challenges I'd say is the recruitment and retention is what I've mentioned before, but because that's a London-wide, nationwide, but it's something that we want to do, and looking at pan-London capacity is something as well that we're looking across. And something that I'd say, the last thing that I'd say that we're trying to do differently is strengthening our system of that one approach across the system, looking at what does it look like from 0 to 25, and at any moment in that baby, that young person, that young adult and that adult life, what does that interface look like for our service? How well do we navigate it? How well do we support you in navigating? And how much does that feel like partnership working rather than a done to, and how we foster that done with? The last thing that I will say, Chair, is what's really, really important and key for me is a good universal offer for everyone. And I think through that, you get everyone coming through your doors, and then you get exposure to those children and families that may need more targeted support. But actually, every one of us has to think about our health and well-being all the time, and you never know what young person may need support at any given time. That's why I really advocate a good universal offer for all. May I talk about the re-engagement unit, Chair? My 1-1 thing as well. We've got a re-engagement unit, and they work with supporting children with social and emotional health and well-being. They do extensive work with schools. They work with our alternative provision, Councillor Woodley would know about as well, making sure that we're offering children and families the right support. And at the moment, I'm in discussions with Annie. We're thinking about how we reconfigure and extend that offer to schools around what we offer around the re-engagement unit. But it also deals with, works with children that are at risk of exclusion, and how we better navigate that system with parents and children. And that includes sometimes young Hackney going with parents to meetings with school, for example, Chair, just again, having an extra person in the room that understands or is closer to the system than usual. That really was the last thing.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your responses and also your answers to the questions from members. I'm sure, you know, it's quite difficult to get down into the details, but I think you did that pretty comprehensively. So thank you so much for that. And just, I think there are a few follow-up questions that would be helpful for us to get some information on. So I think I've written down a list here. So just for the record, so it'd be helpful to get some follow-up on Joe's question around the suitability of our therapy offer, in particular to neurodiverse children, and the evidence base around the offer, and also if we can know a bit more about the nature of the increase in demand around the demographics of those children, but also around the nature of the demand that we're seeing, and again about the unknowns. What do we know about those who we aren't seeing, and whether we're able to have any projections around that. A question that I, of course, that hadn't sort of been raised was about children attending alternative provision, in particular those outside of the borough, because we'd heard as part of that review that we did looking at school exclusions that was a particular challenge for some of those provisions, is linking those young people into services when they were sort of disconnected from local services by the school not being situated within the local authority. Would also be helpful to know what Councillor Young was saying about the financial challenges, and around the length of how long are we seeing young people for what we know to be the most expensive offer? What does that look like for us? I know, as she mentioned, that we're putting a lot of money, more money than many local authorities, but where is that? Where are we seeing most of that money going? And this is just a query on my part in terms of the issues, because I don't know in terms of us accessing, I know we've got these challenges accessing the clinicians. We've got, there are fewer clinicians out there. And I don't know whether that has resulted in, for example, us using, I don't know, agency or the equivalent, and whether that we have any sort of its financial implications around that, and whether there is any scope for us to actually be investing in developing that workforce at all. I know that these courses in, therapy, counselling cost, but they don't cost the world. And I wonder whether there is anything that we could do to actually be investing in increasing, the offer. I don't know what that would necessarily look like, whether it would be a loan type thing or whatever. If there are any examples nationally that we could look to see whether we can start to develop our own workforce that actually reflects what we know the need to be locally. Very briefly, I think, Annie, you want to come in and then I will move on to the next item, please.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Conway. And just because Councillor Bramble said I could say something, it was about that question about the whether Senkos were trained in terms of mental health issues. Each school does have a mental health lead who is different from the WAMS worker, because the WAMS worker isn't a permanent school member of staff. So there will be somebody in the school who has training on mental health needs and is the lead, and all staff will have had some training on recognising and initial support for children with mental health issues. But I do think it's a really good point about that kind of overlay, which links to the mental health issues for neurodiverse children, about the overlay between particular special needs and anxiety, mental health issues. And it is something we will take up with the Senko Forum further. I suspect there has been some training, but that it could be rolled out more consistently.
And also, when I follow up on Joe's question, I'll speak a bit more about the our medical needs tuition service, which I didn't cover as well. So that's also a service thinking about children with long-term illness, but it's not to replace school or education. It's something in the interim when children are unwell as well. So I can put that in the written response as well.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you so much for that, for your responses to that item. We are now moving on to item 7, which is the post-16 SEND strategy, cabinet response. So the Commission made a number of recommendations to the cabinet member for families, early years, parks and play in April 2021 to support the development of a new post-16 strategy. The cabinet member's response to the Commission's recommendations are set out in the report pack. This is just for us to note, although I did want to put a couple of questions to Councillor Woodley. You don't have to answer them on the spot, because I know that you're not prepared for any questions, but just to clarify whether there is going to be a dedicated strategy for post-16 provision, as it's not clear from that response whether it's going to be encapsulated within a broader SEND strategy, or if there will be the refresh as we had anticipated.
So it's integrated in the SEND strategy, which I'm actually bringing to group tomorrow. Okay. It's one of the 4 priorities under sort of preparing for adulthood.
Okay.
So there's specific work around that I can go into. And then if you feel that there's further work that needs to be done, I guess I can take that on board and take that back to officers. But yeah, it's one of the 4 priorities that we're bringing forward in the SEND strategy, which should be published, or should go to Cabinet for adoption in June.
Okay, that's great. And just to check if that does include anything around increasing the number, scope and accessibility of supported internships, as that was a key thing that sort of emerged for us.
Yeah, I'm actually going to go on a site visit with Councillor Williams tomorrow to the Homerton, and I think she has sort of some questions that she wants to ask about how we might work together to build upon that, because it's a question around resources as much as anything else, and developing our partnerships. So I think there's an ambition there, but whether we've got the kind of resource to match is a larger question. So I would have to come back to you on that one.
Okay, great. I think it would be helpful for us to see the broader strategy against, I think, what we've the recommendations, and take it from there, I think, with that one. So thank you so much for that. And then the next item now, so sorry, noted, we noted that. Thank you so much. Moving on to item 8, children's centres consultation. Consultation was published as part of the early years strategy and the reconfiguration of children's centres in October of last year, and the Commission formally responded to the consultation in November. A report of the public consultation has been produced and is enclosed in the agenda pack for members to note. As part of the Commission's work on this topic, parents and children attending children's centres which were proposed for closure were invited to set out their views and concerns to us. Hackney Education has produced a response to the concerns of parents, which is also enclosed in the report pack for members to note. Note both reports?
Nope.
Thank you so much. Now moving on to item 9, which is the work programme. I think this is the first time ever that I've been actually on the button time-wise for the items. I'm just feeling so proud. It's only taken me an entire year to get here, but hey. So, as this is the final meeting of the Commission in this municipal year, it is an opportunity for us to reflect on the work programme for the past year. Like us to sort of go through a few things. So, number one, which is what items have worked particularly well and have had an impact. Two, the way in which the Commission has worked and whether this has worked for members. And three, to have a think about items which we feel as a Commission should remain a priority for us to take forward, the Commission to take forward in future municipal years. So, does anybody have anything that they wish to share on any of those items? I mean, I don't want to keep myself. I'd much rather if you have anything to say about items that you think have worked well. Councillor Sizer.
It's a really general comment, sorry, but as a relative, I don't even know if I'm allowed to call myself a relative newbie anymore, but I'm going to. I've really been impressed at being part of this, at the dedication of the team, and the real commitment to hear different voices in any stream that we're doing. I think there's such a commitment to listen to parents, to children, to lived experience, and that really has come out. And I feel like I've learned huge amounts this year, but for me the exclusions work has really stood out, and I think will stay with me for a long time. I think it was an incredible piece of work, but it really is quite an amazing group. So it's not even a very specific comment, sorry, but that I just wanted to feed that back.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sizer. Councillor Hanson.
I completely agree with the previous comment on a slightly different tack. I think we should produce a one-page note about the format for reports that come to this committee, and saying that reports that have acronyms and jargon will be sent back for rewriting. Because I think I appreciate that education is a sector that's full of jargon and acronyms, but I have actually had real difficulty understanding documents that have been sent to me. And spending time on the internet trying to work out what an acronym means is not a good use of anyone's time. And I could get it wrong, I could think it means something different. So I really, I appreciate that writing reports for this committee is not people's main occupation, but certainly in my day job, I would have things sent back if they didn't say what the acronym stood for, or make it clear what the scope of someone's responsibility was, something like that, or the difference between what we can do in the maintained sector versus an academy.
I think you're totally right, and we have to be accessible.
Yeah.
And it's not, we have to think about who the audience might be, people tuning in, and also we've made, I think this commission, particularly this municipal year, has made a real commitment to engaging as many young people as possible on this commission. And, that's another reason why we just need to assume that everybody who's accessing this, remotely or tuning in or joining us, any of the children and young people, that they're not going to be well versed in what we're talking about, and that we need to make it more accessible. So I think.
I realise I'm standing down from the council on the 4th of May, but I'm perfectly happy to contribute to such a one-page document.
Yeah,
but I think until we actually put our money where our mouth is and send it back. I have said month after month at these meetings, please can we not have endless acronyms? And the report author immediately apologises and then gives a 10-minute speech full of acronyms. I'm not fingering anyone in particular, but it's very, very noticeable.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hanson. Councillor Charlton.
Thank you, Sophie. And, I totally endorse what Anya said as a relative newbie myself. It's been a huge learning experience, and for me the outstanding work was the exclusion research, and also I think the send provision, that that's something that we are going to have to really dedicate time to alongside the exclusions. I think they go hand in hand anyway, and so I would like to see those as our overarching priorities. But one suggestion I'd like to make is that for each major piece of work, such as the exclusions, an incredibly brief summary is produced for as wide a distribution as possible. When I worked at the London Assembly in the Scrutiny, you know, for the in the I can't remember what they were called now, but anyway, we, you know, we'd produce you know, we'd have a commission on a piece of work, and you know, receive a very long report, but we would summarize it on one side of A4 so that the public knew. And then those were like on a bookshelf, you know, like next to the cafe, and people would just pick them up and put them in their bag and walk off with them. And it meant that the general public knew what we were doing. And I think this is important. We are, at the end of the day, you know, okay, we're holding the cabinet to account, but we are to be held to account by the general public. And, you know, I think this is one way that we could effectively do that. Not obviously not by probably on print, but certainly, you know, like publishing not only on the council website, but, you know, like in local newspapers, or, you know, as far afield as we can, basically. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And I think, Martin, I'm right in saying that that was the plan, isn't it? To have an abbreviated summary of the exclusion.
Yeah.
I'm hoping to do that.
Yeah, just to get a summary of that. Also, obviously, that's quite a weighty piece of work, isn't it? To even to summarise it into a page would be just to kind of get some key things. You're right. I think to get that public-facing work out, our messages out, what the successes that we have and the outcomes that we have and we achieve as a commission is important for the buy-in for the community and the people who kind of contribute to our reviews. That's really important to get those messages out.
In all fairness, very rarely are exclusion reports ever that long, so that was a really big piece of work, and I think that, you know,
yeah, you can't summarise the whole thing. I think you can say what the scope of the report was. I don't think you should try and summarise all the recommendations, for example.
Key messages. It's just the key messages.
Yeah. No, I think it's totally possible. It's totally possible. Sorry, so I think we've got Joe, James. Did you want to get Councillor Salmon? And I think, yeah, Councillor Young. Joe?
Hi, I suppose that I would agree actually with everything that everyone else has said so far. I think the piece of work we did on exclusions has, as everyone has said, has been so impactful, and also the work on SEND. And I think we need to keep those and the way they overlap and intersect at the forefront. I think going forwards, there's also a huge intersection with all of that and this mental health issue that I feel we've only just started to scratch the surface of. I think we need to be really trying to look at the impact, as well as some of the sort of headline data around waiting times and so on, but we need to be much more thoughtful about what is the impact of all of these various measures. We've got a range of things going on which are all very good, but how impactful are they? Who's actually getting in front of them? And I suppose going forwards, it would be really nice to be able to integrate even more the voice of young people, the voice of other stakeholders like parents. And I think we've made a really good start with that, but there's so much more we could do. And I'm thinking particularly about the piece of work on exclusions. That was a really, really impactful part of that work, was holding forums where we as a commission heard directly the experiences of young people and their parents. We're not relying on reports from other professionals to tell us what they think young people and parents are saying. And I think it would be really nice for us to find more ways to integrate us as a commission hearing directly from the stakeholders themselves, whether that's in the form of forums that we do, finding ways for people to come and speak at meetings, or us visiting people on site. I know we've been quite hampered by the pandemic, but in other ways, online forums also open up other possibilities. But yeah, I suppose just to put it out there, I think it would be good to find more ways to do more of that work.
Thank you, Jo. Councillor Peters?
I think certainly SEND provision is something that this commission should continue to look at and scrutinise, and exclusions, possibly also with an emphasis on mental health services for young people in Hackney as well. I'd certainly agree with the idea that Councillor Troughton's idea that it would be good to produce something pithy that can be shared, highlighting the work of the Scrutiny Commission and indeed scrutiny of the council on social media by the council and by members of the commission and all that sort of thing. I think that would be great. On the glossary, it might be an idea actually, or terminology, or it might be a good idea to produce a glossary for the commission that can be published with each set of documents, and that can be added to over time. To mean that we're not reproducing work. And then the last thing I think that that occurs to me that the Commission should be focusing on or not lose sight of is the response to the Ofsted inspection. I don't think that's finished, and I think we should continue to keep that under review.
Thank you very much. I think we have Councillor Selman, Councillor Young.
So the first thing was building on Joe's point, and I assume that we're doing this, but just assume that we're getting feedback from the young attendees that have joined us about how they have found it and if there's anything else that we could do to make it sort of more accessible. I guess just to echo everything everybody said about how important and how glad I am that we are thinking of doing a summary around about the exclusions report. I was also thinking about how we can do that as well when we're doing the follow-up in terms of reporting back on progress as well. One of the things that really struck me was on the other side of the tables in the cabinet role, and I'm sure Deputy Mayor Bramble sees this all the time, is how much interest there was in that report from parents, members of our staff as well, with across the council. And I think the more that we can do to kind of be really accessible and talking about and demonstrating that those concerns are being taken really seriously is really important. And I guess linked to that is whether we can do anything more working with the Youth Parliament in terms of jointly talking about stuff. And I mean, again, one of the things that I think was a real learning for us as a council across the board to the Young Futures Commission was different ways of how we could better communicate with a range of ages. And some of that is it not always just being a boring staid council web page about something. And again, I frequently do have referred people to the work of the Commission on people who are really interested in it, but it does often mean referring them to quite like a long report or like a link in like when we used to have the calendar invite, which isn't a very accessible thing for a lot of people. So I recognise that all of this stuff brings additional work, but the more that we can sort of bring that stuff alive, the better, I would say. Yeah. But also, having joined partly through, it's been a real joy to be back on Scrutiny, and it's like, yeah, it just reminds me of like what an effective function it is. So thanks to Commission members for that.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Oh, did you?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I just really appreciate the work that's done on Scrutiny. When I used to sit on Scrutiny, I really felt like I was making a fundamental difference to everything the council does, either identifying what we do well or definitely highlighting what we do better. Now sitting on the other side, it's really helpful for me to have a place that will ensure that holds me to account, ensure that everything we do is done with integrity and thought is evidence-based, but also just to hold us to task and having that robust internal challenge, but being a critical friend. It isn't demeaning, it isn't undermining, it isn't there to criticise or undermine us, it's there to ensure that we're doing the best we possibly can for our residents. And I just think that the more society becomes more challenges and we face more tensions and challenges, the more scrutiny that we need to ensure that we're in the right direction of travel. So thank you.
Sorry, Chair, there was a part that I pressed. I'll be really brief. The other thing was just, and I'm aware that I joined midway through, so we might have already been doing this, and also we've had a pandemic. But if we are able to be introducing more going out to places. And I know that that has been a real challenge for obvious reasons, but yeah, I think that would be really great if we're able to do more of going to rather than just,
And from other commissions and from planning committee and things, what can be really, really great is if it's possible to do, say, a whole morning or afternoon visits, because certainly when I was on health scrutiny, they would do one visit to one service in the middle of the day for 1 hour, which for people working full time is almost impossible. Whereas, you know, if you can say do 2 or 3 visits in the same day, it's then possible to plan and actually take the time off to do it. Otherwise, it means that the only people who ever get to go on the visits are people who don't have full-time jobs.
Yeah, completely agree. Councillor Young.
I agree with everything that everyone said. I was very worried joining the commission that there are no opposition party representatives on the commission. So I was concerned, having worked in scrutiny at the Assembly, where you have representatives from ranging from UKIP to Greens, Lib Dems, Labour Conservative. It seemed very odd to be on a single party scrutiny commission. But actually, in this commission, it seems to work incredibly well, and the kind of quality of the scrutiny is really, really good, and it's, you know, fantastic to see officers engaging so much. The 2 things that I sort of felt, I suppose, going over the last, it's not a year even, is it? One was just how much there is on the agenda, and as someone with a full-time job, I really struggled to do the reading. I think in the first meeting I attended, I asked a question about not the thing we were talking about because I was so struggling to keep up with the reading. I have managed to cope with that since, but you know, it's just a huge, huge amount. And the second part that relates to that is, I just wonder whether if our agendas were a little bit less heavy, we would be able to ask the 3rd and 4th question on the same point to the same officer, because I feel we're able to ask one question and there's an answer, which hopefully, if you're really good at your job, you've already prepared for that question. But I'm not able to ask a 2nd and a 3rd follow-up that might get further into it. And that's because we're, you know, despite brilliant chairing and vice chairing, we're always struggling for time. So I just wondered if there's, I couldn't tell you what I'd cut off the agenda, by the way, but whether there's a way of us doing that.
But you know what, I think there might be a happy medium, and that might be the stuff that we can do outside of the meetings. So if we start to do more of the site visits, and we can sort of, you know, members of the commission who have a particular interest can come along to those site visits, and we can present papers where we're not going, and meet with officers outside, you know, and then we can present our findings so that there isn't, which we've done in the past. Much of the work that we did around the post-16 SEND strategy was around the work that we did in focus groups outside of the meeting. So I definitely think that that's possible. Sorry, Councillor Woodley.
I'm actually covering the same ground, because I think when I was on the other side of the scrutiny table, it was doing the site visits that got me more and more engrossed in this sort of area of work, particularly hearing staff voices, children and young people's voices, you know, both sides of the coin, I guess, the schools that we're concerned about, but also the struggle and the challenges that they face. Really rich on the ground information means a lot, and it's really impactful. On the back of that meant that we're very committed, I guess, with parent liaison in terms of the work you've done, Councillor Bramble, and school councils and pupil voice, in some of the area of work that I've done around SEND. And I guess my one frustration perhaps with these meetings, when we have had young people come to them, apart from when it's been a very effective, very dedicated bit of work, I think you did around the impact of COVID on some of our young people that were having to cope with that and being out of school. I don't think we've been the most engaging, the commission isn't the most engaging place for young people to come. So the dream is to have sort of challenge boards, or to use our school councils to go out to them with specific questions. It's been quite useful with some of the parks engagement work. I got to meet the Stormont House School Council out on a playground, talking about what we plan to do with that playground, and to listen to their ideas and the rich and varied ideas that came into. It's not a scrutiny function, but it's a real engagement. And I think, you know, again, sorry to add to the workload, that kind of combination, yeah, I think would be really, really helpful to the commission.
Completely agree. Just back to you, Lynn, and then I'll briefly summarise.
Thank you, Sophie. Just to address Councillor Young's point, I do think some of the material could be put into appendices and, you know, just very briefly summarised within reports to make it a bit easier, you know, to get through the paper. I've struggled with the paperwork, I'm not going to lie. You know, sometimes I feel I'm just skimming through, trying to pick out the key bits, you know. And there are I mean, there are various parts that I think, you know, I really want to drill down into this, and I would look at that data, but finding that data is difficult. It's actually easier to find if it's, you know, in sort of like properly itemized appendices. Not always, but sometimes.
Chair, can I just say two quick things? Just on that point, actually, Councillor Young talked about the amount of meetings. We do have less meetings now, unfortunately, because meetings had to get cut back when they were thinking about financial constraints. So while we absolutely said we are absolutely not taking away scrutiny, what we do have now is unfortunately less meetings. So it does make it a bit of a challenge. But what there is opportunities to do, that I remember that when I was chair, and I think you've done this as well, chair, is that you have a whole day when you look at a given area, and then it feeds into what Councillor Hanson said. If you want to take half a day off work or a whole day, you get to drop into that, and then if you can't, the then meeting focuses on what you did throughout that day, and that's another way as well to look at interesting pieces of work to do.
Thank you very much. So just to sort of summarise and just to give my input as well, in terms of what I think, and I think members have shared my sentiments on this, what has worked well this year and has had an impact. I think, of course, the school exclusions piece, but also the joint work that we did with Health in Hackney, which I know was very, you know, we've not done anything beyond that, but it was a scoping piece really to find out whether we had some issues in relation to disproportionality in perinatal mental health, which I think is something that we should and can build on as a commission going forward. Also the piece that we did around the independent commissioning of SEND schools, and I think linking that to our budget monitoring was immensely helpful, and also laid the, you know, foundations, I think, for future work that we're doing around the commissioning of all independent provisions for, not just for children with special educational needs, but also supporters accommodation for children who looked after children and other vulnerable children and young people. Also, the budget monitoring has just been hugely helpful for us to help us to identify what are the pressure points for us as a council and the areas that actually we really benefit from increased scrutiny and our input on our strategies going forward to manage those challenges. And then also the item that we had on early years strategy and the reconfiguration of children's centres. And that was an example again of what we were talking about, and hearing the voices of parents and young people and service users and concerned parties in relation to the work that the council does in delivering these services to children, young people and families. Noted everything everybody said, but even I struggle to get through the paperwork, and I really do try to dedicate quite a lot of time to going through it. It's tricky, it is tricky. So I think that we could try an amalgamation of different things in terms of summaries, what you've mentioned, Councillor Charlton, about using appendices and really just trying to summarise the key highlights from the reports, so that we have as much time as possible to drill down into the questions, but also taking some things outside of the meeting and meeting young people and staff and officers where they are in various different settings. I think also what worked well was the joint, actually something I haven't mentioned, is the piece that we did around housing, which I think was probably one of the, it was a really, really helpful piece that we did around care leavers and our housing offer, and I would like to see us doing more joint work with the other commissions, especially around our net zero aspirations and the youth voice around that. I think that we'd be able to really contribute towards that space. And also it's worth noting that many of you may not have read this today, but today a serious case review was published in relation to child named in the report as child Q, and this was a young person who was strip searched in school by a 15-year-old who was strip searched in school by the police. I think that what this report highlights is issues around policing, in particular policing of people from the Black community who are overrepresented in all of the statistics that we have around stop and search, but also now what we've seen, children who are being searched, strip searched by the police within the borough, but also issues around our approach, our school's approach to safeguarding and the response that this school in particular took to this young girl turning up to school, and what they say is, you know, she turned up to school smelling of cannabis on this occasion. And when we would expect, I imagine, I speak for all of us as a commission when I say that response to that ought to have been a safeguarding response. It was not a safeguarding response, it was a criminal justice response, which to me is colluding with a criminal justice system that we know and we are seeing detrimental disparities between the way that the Black community in particular are being policed and other communities are being policed, and it's to the detriment of the well-being and futures of the many children in our borough. So I think somehow we have to find a way of bringing that into sharp focus. And I was thinking whether that might come under looking at girls, actually, because we're speaking so much about boys, we forget sometimes that girls and girls from particular groups, not just Black girls, but girls from other ethnic minority groups are overrepresented in our care system in terms of limited access to mental health support, in terms of being over-policed, and often the headlines are just on Black boys and mixed race boys. We forget that there are Black girls who are experiencing something similar. So I think maybe we need to do a piece as a commission to look at girls' experiences and also around violence against women and girls and the support that different girls from different groups are receiving.
Chair, can I just say on child Q as well, I think that the importance of mentioning adultification in the process as well is a really important thing. And you know, obviously I'm not on the Scrutiny Commission, so I can't make recommendations, but if the Scrutiny Commission were to include adultification as part of that piece of work, I would definitely welcome that as the cabinet member.
I was on my list of things, it's so cross-cutting and it looks at different policy areas. And can I just take this opportunity to thank the Safeguarding Partnership and for being so bold. Actually, it's a really bold serious case review, and it really makes clear the lack of appetite from senior partners in safeguarding and also in the police to actually look at this for what it is, and that is that where we see disproportionality, people's identities cannot be ignored. We can't say that we're colourblind, you know, we can't just say, oh, well, it's incompetence and it's poor practice and it's a one-off and it's experienced by the same groups over and over again. And that is what racism is. It doesn't need to be overt. It can be covert, and in most instances it is. So I just would like to have on record a huge thanks to the Safeguarding Partnership for putting their head above the parapet and actually saying it like it is. And I really hope that this is the beginning of future pieces of work where we are really holding our partners in the borough to account for the lack of service that they are providing to our children and the poor service, appalling service in this case for this particular young person. And it's not the only young person in serious case review where race has been identified as an issue. We've also had others such as Tashawn Aird, who's been named in his serious case review, who died as a result of issues around the offer that what he received from different services. And you know, Jim again and the Safeguarding Board recognised the role that race and racism played in regards to that. So thank you for that, really much appreciated. So going forward, I'll really briefly say that I think budget monitoring, we have to continue with that. Mental health, as we've just mentioned today, and just finding out a bit more about, you know, our challenges going forward, especially given that we're unclear of what the impact of the pandemic yet is, and SEND provision, especially in light of efforts around the school estates strategy, but also maybe focusing on what the maintained schools offer, because actually the vast majority of children with special educational needs in the borough are within our maintained mainstream settings. Continuing with our work around inequalities and disproportionality in relation to school exclusions, but also attainment gap, and continuing with joint work with other commissions, but also I think perhaps doing some joint work with health, around health, because we haven't looked at health. We've looked at mental health, but we haven't looked at health, certainly since I've been chair. So I think that would be a good thing for the commission to look into. Adultification, as we just mentioned, HMIP inspection, looking at the yacht a bit more in light of that inspection. And as you've all mentioned about engaging more with young people, I think that this year, probably one of the key things from that piece that we did around housing was actually, it was the young people. Absolutely. It was hearing from the lived experiences that challenged what the council was saying about the offer. And that was integral to that piece of work. So I think it's about, you know, it's about engaging as much as we possibly can, not just with youth parliament, but as you mentioned, Councillor Woodley, also with school councils, and trying to find, and Young Hackney, if there are other young people that we're able to engage and connect with, and also trying to make the commission and engaging with the commission more appealing for those who are already on it. So I think what we're thinking about doing is, there's been a restructure of youth parliament, so to see how we can feed into that somehow, so that the people who have a particular interest in any of the things that we're looking at can elect to sort of put themselves forward. I think that that's about it, and obviously the parent groups, and whether or not we can invite more people in. And yeah, so thank you so much for that. So, Margaret, I know we haven't heard very much from you, so Councillor Gordon, I'm going to have to, even though I needed to move on, I'm going to have to give you the opportunity to speak.
I do apologise. I was just going to say that I agree with everything that's been said, but I just wanted to follow that with that. I think it would be great to pursue the idea that I think you had previously, Chair, in relation to a youth-led session of the Commission. You know, I think it would be good to try and explore those sort of opportunities. Yeah,
we've been talking about a youth takeover, so somebody else taking the chair and just, you know, what are the priorities for young people? They can determine what that agenda would look like. So yes, let's put that forward as something for the next municipal year. So for this item now, it's for the next municipal year. The next meeting is on the 30th of June 2022, and given that member confirmation is not until the AGM on May the 25th, to confirm that standing items, we think the easiest thing to happen is for standing items to be for that June meeting, school places and childcare sufficiency, because it will give officers sufficient time to sort of prepare for that, rather than agreeing on something with shorter notice for officers. So do members agree that that would be on the agenda for the first meeting? And now I would just like to formally thank the long-suffering Vice Chair for all of her support to the work of the Commission, but also to, you know, you've all been saying what a wonderful Commission it is, and that's because it's a collective of people who are really passionate about children and young people, and who all bring your own experiences and your appetite to hear from children and young people and parents in the borough to improve services. So thank you all, officers, cabinet members, just everybody for making this commission be what it is.
Well done to you, Chair.
No, thank you. And thank you so much again, Councillor Hanson and Councillor Peters. So let's just... Thank you.
Could I just thank Martin as well?
Yes.
Thank you, Martin.
Yeah, far.
And also, and I was just sort of alluding to that before, I wasn't just saying that the scrutiny report, with the exclusions report, I was trying to say it's unusual that we would have such a comprehensive report, and that is testament to Martin really did authentically communicate absolutely everything that was put to us by the children and young people that we spoke to, and that required a hell of a lot of work. So yeah, just to reiterate, thank you, Martin, not just for that work on the exclusion report, but for everything. He's a fantastic scrutiny support officer. Don't know what I'd do without him. So minutes of the meetings held on the 19th of January and the 28th of February were not available for this meeting, but will be printed at the next, presented at the next meeting. And again, the next meeting is on the 30th of June. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Thank you, Chair.